together with Parashat Vayelech. Good morning. Two parshiyot that come together, page 1086. And this is a nation that was just experienced detailed description of the tochachav, the admonition, the curses of last week, a painful experience. So Moshe Rabbeinu turns to the nation on page 1086 and he tells them, Atem Nitzavim Hayom. You are all Nitzavim, standing. Now, the word itself obviously needs some clarification. If we are being informed here that we are all standing here, it could have just stated Atem Omdim Hayom Kulchem. The Torah uses the word Nitzavim. But we are all standing Lifnei Hashem Elokechem, in front of God. And this presence in front of God includes everyone. Rashechem, the heads of your tribe, right? Or Rashechem of Shiftechem, the head of your tribes. Ziknechem, your elders. Shotrechem, the officers. Kol Ish Yisrael. And this presence here, this gathering that is taking place, includes even Tapechem Benafshechem, small children, women, Ger Chasher Bekerev Machanecha, even the proselyte who is in your midst. Chotevet Secha, from the one who chops wood, at Shoev Memecha, from the Wassertroger, to the one who is drawing the water. So why are we all gathered here today? Why are we here today, they ask. So they are informed that this gathering is Leovrecha Bivrit, to go ahead and pass into a covenant, a new covenant with the Almighty. And it's a covenant that is going to be Koret Imecha Hayom, that God will seal with you today at the end of verse 11. And as a result of this covenant in verse 12, it's going to establish you today as a nation. Leman Hakim Otcha Hayom Lo Le'am. You are going to be an established nation, and God is going to be your Elohim, your God. Now, have we not gone through enough covenants with the Almighty? In other words, what is this covenant thing that He likes so much? Avraham Avinu had a covenant. Mount Sinai, wasn't there not a covenant there? I think it was a covenant. It's quite a significant one. We're still, dealing with it. Another covenant? Like, why is there a need for this brit that we are being presented here? So we have two questions. Number one, Nitzavim. And number two, this idea of a brit again. Who needs it? Mount Sinai worked well. So, number one, the word Nitzavim, there are different approaches to deal with it. There are those that note that when you are standing, you are omed. When you are standing but you are glued to the ground, if you by mistake, at times they put on a sidewalk fresh cement, correct? And they'll stamp it with the date. I always wonder why they stamp it with the date. They do it. There's a few 2013s and 14s here. So maybe when you walk home from shul on Shabbos, you could entertain yourself. Or, I'm not sure why, but there are times you're going to find there a footprint. A hand, usually it's a smaller hand of a kid who is curious and wants to have the ability of showing it to his children one day. So if you have both shoes set in your cement and you are there, you are a real nitzav. You are a real nitzavim. It comes from the word matzeva, it's a monument. So one explanation to this stronger term of standing is that this is a nation that felt weakened after what happened last week. They hear this long list of awful things that are going to befall them, their children, so they're terrified. They couldn't stand straight. So God is giving chizuk, and He's telling them, you should know that yes, there is the possibility of going through a lot of suffering, but you're going to stand here today, you're going to stand in the future. As a nation, you're always going to be around. That's a guarantee. You're always going to be around. There are always going to be people of Israel in the world. And if your identity becomes for Klal Yisrael, it's very comforting. Now, if my identity is all about me and what's good for me, it doesn't give us too much comfort that there are always going to be Jews. But if your identity is, I am part of this nation, I value this nation, I value the identity of this nation, a guarantee that there are always going to be Jews around should give me a level of satisfaction. So this Nitzavim, this stronger standing, more significant and substantial stand, is to encourage them after what they heard last week. That is one approach. Then there's another approach to the word Nitzavim. A covenant is there for you to deal with the human condition of having ups and downs, right? I'm a human. I have good days, I have bad days. I'm sometimes in a very good mood, right? And sometimes in a bad mood. I'm human. If you never have any fluctuation, right? So, tell me what you're taking, or perhaps you're an angel. Angels don't have fluctuations. In Tanakh, they call angels omdim. Omdim. Why are they called? Natati lecha mahalachim. It's a pasuk in Cheskel. Ben ha'omdim ha'ele. Why are angels? Angels don't have bad days. It's cool, right? Every day it's the same. They're like robots. But God is not big into robots. God doesn't like robots. God wants humans, because humans have ups and downs. Now, at times I make a commitment, and my commitment was made when I was on the up, right? I committed myself that I am no longer going to eat fatty potato chips, because it's not good for me. Right? I made it when I was inspired. It was right after hearing a lecture about the saturated fats and what it does for the heart. I made that commitment, correct? I made that commitment when I was in a good mood. But then after a long day, I'm exhausted. I sit down by the couch. I'm in front of the TV, and I'm with my beer. And what's natural? You want those potato chips. You want the saturated fat potato chips. So, of course, what I committed to earlier is, poof, gamarno, and it could be many, many different things. It could be tobacco. The list is long, correct? So if you, on the other hand, enter into a covenant where you lock it in, you make a vow. Jewish tradition talks about vows. A Nazir, the Nazir has a problem that the wine controls him. He doesn't control the wine. I drink wine, right? I think, right, because everyone could fool themselves, that I control the intake, and I'm under control. I'm careful when I drink, I'm careful how much I drink, so I'm in control. But what happens if the bottle controls me? The bottle controls me means that I really don't want to have more, but what can I do? I can't manage without it. So then Judaism structured something called the Nazir. You make a vow, you are locked into it. And it's extremely severe to go ahead and break a vow. That's awful. So you are locked into something. And Klal Yisrael has ups and downs. There are days that we feel connected to God. There are days we feel that He's not in our life and we can manage without it. So we lock in that relationship. There's a covenant and becomes like a monument. A monument is always there. Why do you put up a monument? Because you want to go ahead and every once in a while return and to read names of family members, or to remember a very special person. There's a monument there because you want to grab that moment. So when you are entering into a covenant, you need a monument. And that's what Nitzavim, like a matzeva. Same idea, it's a stone. It is something that is there, it is permanent, it locks in the moment. That's what we try to do during this season. It's a season that we feel elevated. So we try to find something not major to change in life, because major is no good. But if you go ahead and find something minor that you can lock it in, I commit myself that when I say Shema, I'm actually going to think about it. I commit myself that when I bench, I'll actually try to focus a little bit more. So when I lock something in during a time of spiritual elevation, that's a nitzavim, that's a matzeva, and that's what the covenant is about. Okay, so different explanations to a very significant word, the name of this week's parsha. You want to know what it's about? Nitzavim. So you can take one approach that it has to do with the past, with what they heard last week, or you could take the approach that it is to lock in their condition. Remember on one of the radio stations, if it was in Buffalo or Memphis, that they would say that, listen to WCCK, 107.2, lock it in, meaning put it, right now, I want you to put it on one of your set buttons. You know that in the car you have like 6 buttons? We want you to set one of your buttons to it, because we don't want you playing up and down and finding another station that's good. If you're locking it in, right, and it becomes one of those 6 stations that you're going to turn to, that you feel comfortable pushing the button even when you are driving, when you're not supposed to eat, text. So that's how you lock it in. Lock it in. That's the matzeva that we are supposed to read about. But what is, now let's return to the bigger question. Who needs another covenant? We had a covenant at Sinai. Avraham Avinu, okay, that's an individual that God is locked in to give his children the Torah, right? God locked him. I have no doubt that God in Egypt, when Klal Yisrael are in Egypt, and they are sinking, right, lower and lower and lower spiritually, losing their identity, God says, oh boy, I'm really stuck with that one, right? How do I deal with this covenant? Okay, I'm going to have to take them out. But I said for 100 years, right? So God was struggling with the issue. He makes a covenant with Avraham, guarantee that one day he's going to make his children these people who are going to educate humanity, right? The light upon the nations. But they have to go through in Egypt. But we go through in Egypt, then we are vanishing spiritually. And God, what does he do? He had to give 400 years, give a number. And he's sitting there, and God's looking at his watch, and he's saying, how much left? And he's told Rip, about 200 years left. He's scratching his head and says, it's not going to work, right? They're going to vanish. So what do I do? What options do I have? To choose someone else? I can't. He's stuck. He loved Avraham Avi, right? So he locked in. So what do you do? So he called in some Jewish accountants who worked the numbers and made 400 into 210, right? That's how he did it. He managed very well. That's what happens when you're locked in. You work things out, right? Marriage, you're locked in. Locked in. Camera's on me. You locked it in. You're locked in. What? That's exactly what I wanted. How busy. You locked in it. When you're locked in it, you work it out. That's what it's about, right? That's why it's significant. In Judaism, we value the marriage itself. We pay a lot of money, right, for a wedding. You could not again. We pay a lot of money to marry off our children because it's significant. In a society where marriage, like where you could have someone, I remember my 4th wife was telling me that, was it my 4th or my 5th? I don't remember exactly. In other words, when marriages are performed in chapels in Vegas, where you drive through, if you're putting the same amount of effort into a marriage as you are picking up a coffee from Starbucks, so obviously it's not so significant. If you're still paying for it, for the marriage of your children 12 years later, right? So then you know that it's indeed probably something quite significant. It's a covenant. That's how we view covenant. But what do we need another one for? Okay? So what's the answer to the question? Why have another brit? So what we have to understand as a nation is that we are a different entity when we have a kehillah, when we have a community, when we are an am. And what do I mean by that? Imagine you have a job that you are supposed to be as tour guide to Israel. Right? They chose you as a tour guide to Israel, that you're going to have to go ahead and take a group of non-Jews who have absolutely no background and no knowledge of the Middle East or Israel, right? They've never heard of, they know a little bit, but they really want to understand Israel, and you are the tour guide. You are a tour guide. My mother one day could tell you this story, that I was a tour guide at age 9. Right? It's in Kibbutz Lavi. It's a great story. So you come to Israel, and you could explain a little bit about the Middle East. You could explain the politics, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. Oh, fine. You go ahead, you run through things. And then suddenly you come to a religious community. You come to a religious community. You come to Mea Shearim. You come to a religious Zionist community. And they ask you, what's the difference between the people who you call Haredim and the people that you call religious Zionists? What's the core difference between them? Right? Do they both value your Torah, which you've talked about on the bus? Yes, they both value the Torah. Do they both believe in the revelation? Yes. Do they both value the land of Israel? Yes, they clearly both value the land of Israel. So what's really the core difference between the two? So how do you explain it? How are you going to explain it in an eloquent, clear, or the truth in essence? What's the difference? So you have to turn into a sociologist, you realize. In other words, I'm guilty of it at times, that I would go into a rabbinic institution where most probably, if I would be, what I should be doing is be inspired and soaking up the experience, but I enter as a sociologist. I am analyzing how is this having an impact, how do they view this individual. It's an approach, it's not always good, but that's a reality. So as a sociologist, what is the core difference between, we would call them Haredim and the religious Zionists? And we're talking about all good people. All of them do chesed, by the way. There's no question about it. They all value Torah. They all value Eretz Yisrael. There's no question about it. They're all good people, and we have a lot to learn from all of them, for the record. All of them can inspire us. But there's a difference, right? What is the core difference? Anyone want to take an approach? Yes?
I think the Haredim are inward-looking.
Inward.
In other words, they look at their own group, and a religious Zionist looks in and out.
True. Good approach, good approach. That is the byproduct of something. In other words, it's a philosophical, it must be rooted in philosophy, but what you are pointing is to something that is a result of a philosophy.
Well, it's like the shtetl mentality.
Oh, shtetl mentality.
Yeah.
Okay, correct. That is true. That is correct as well. Anyone else? Yes?
Haredim reject secularism altogether.
Okay, a rejection, which is similar to the same idea, that it's shtetl, secularism is new, the modern world and all it comes with is a challenge to the shtetl of 250 years ago, so they're going to reject it. Correct. But there's something behind, there's a little bit more to it. There's a little bit more to it, and I think this is the core. We always point to the fact that the third temple, we pray for it, we've been waiting for it. How is it going to appear? So the Rambam tells us that there's a mitzvah to one day actually build a third temple. Very simple. It's a structure. There's wood, mortar, bricks, big stones, big stones. So you're going to have to go ahead and one day build it. Fine. Rashi shares with us, based on traditions he received, that it is a structure that's going to come down from heaven. It's there already, and it's just going to appear in a supernatural way. That's what Rashi tells us. Now, these seem to be two explanations, which are fine, we can deal with them, but I always believe that they represent and they symbolize philosophies. And that is the rebuilding, the return to the land of Israel. The return to the land of Israel. Is the return to the land of Israel one that is going to take a natural course, or one that will be supernatural? If it is natural, so if one day an opportunity develops where I can make my way back, I have a mitzvah to be part of that return. If I view it as supernatural, I will wait passively until God reveals himself. And when I hear that blast of the shofar, then I will make my way to the land of Israel. Okay? Two schools. Now, you're going to say to me, but wait a second, you're telling me as follows, that if you are a follower, or as we observe, remember, we're a sociologist now, we are not part of any movement because we want to understand it. So if I analyze a religious Zionist movement, they are following a philosophy that the building of the land, or the return to the land of Israel, must be done by us. We could play a significant role in the process, and therefore we have joined the nation in this process. while the Haredi approach is that I just take a passive role and wait God to go ahead and appear. But the obvious question is, there are many Haredim in Israel, and there were many of them there 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, right? So it's not like they were not interested in making their way into the land of Israel. So what you have to understand is that the old Yishuv, a term which you've heard quite often, had the following philosophy, that we are there to be in Israel as to experience something that's very spiritual. Our survival is based on funds that come from Chutz La'aretz, and our goal is not to build a homeland. Our goal is to have a personal experience, right? My kids were in Israel a few weeks ago, and they visited a stone, a grave of my grandfather's great-grandmother, right? So you could cover there a couple generations, my kids visiting it. And her name was Etel Shlomovitz, I think the name is. And her story was as follows, that her husband was a dayan in Kovna. Her husband was a dayan in Kovna. He passed away probably in the 1890s. And then she decides, my life is coming to an end. Where do I want to end my life? In the land of Israel. So she travels to the land of Israel and dies there about 110 years ago. Right? Her journey was a typical journey. There were many that felt that, I want to end my life in a spiritual state in Eretz Yisrael. That's where I want to live. That's where I want to be buried. It has nothing to do with the nation. It is a journey of the individual, for the individual, which is wonderful, but that's what it's all about. How do you survive? In other words, how did the people there survive? There were children that were born there in 1810 and in 1710 and even in 1610. So they always had people going out to Chutz La'aretz to collect. That was the tradition. It's a great tradition. I've been doing some fascinating research about, there was one of the greatest rabbinic authorities that I love talking about was Rabbi Chizkiah de Silva. Chizkiah de Silva, Pri Chadash, an author of a work, brilliant work. He passed away, I think he was 40 years old, very young man, but his halachic work has been turned to since the 17th century, passed away around 1698, hundreds of times, thousands of times, quoted, studied. He himself was in Jerusalem. The financial situation there was extremely difficult. So they send him out around 1688 to Europe to collect funds. While he's there in Amsterdam in 1691, he publishes his work. That's an opportunity. There in Amsterdam, he meets a fellow by the name of Jacob Pereira. Jacob Pereira. Who is Jacob Pereira? Jacob Pereira is the biggest macher in the Amsterdam stock market. The biggest macher there. Jacob Pereira is so wealthy that when William III of Orange, extremely significant individual, right? When there was a struggle there between him and his uncle James, if England should be Catholic or Protestant. So William of Orange is a Protestant, and he invades and he takes over England, right? And it becomes a Protestant country. There's one place where he does not succeed, and that is in Ireland. And since then, you have this issue with Ireland that's Catholic, and you could nod if you nod that way too, if it's not right. So that's what's taking place there. Now, who sponsors him? If you have an army, what about providing bread in different locations? You have to go ahead and borrow funds. Who's running the whole show? Two Yidden. One of them is Jacob Pereira. So Jacob Pereira is extremely wealthy, and he gives to the Pri Chadash or Chizkiah de Silva 20,000 ducats. 20,000, which I spoke to my older brother. This is a tremendous amount of money at the time to open a yeshiva or to reopen the yeshiva in Yerushalayim and rename it Bet Yaakov Pereira. So that was the yeshiva in Yerushalayim. The same Pereira, right, is the one. There's a lot of fascinating details that I'm picking up on that period. That's the norm. You get support from the outside, not to build a country, not to build a community, but rather to allow the individual to experience something that is spiritual, which is wonderful. That is one agenda. Okay? On the other hand, the movement, the Zionist movement, is to build a nation. That the ultimate goal should be that we can support ourselves, that we work as a nation. The ultimate goal is that we actually have a homeland. If you are a religious Zionist, you believe that yes, we might not disagree with them, with the secular, that the land we want to create is one that puts an end to the ghetto existence. Rather, this is here part of our vision of return, but it's a national experience. It's not for the prat, it's not for the individual, it is for the klal. That's the core difference. So now, if I'm a person who thinks about the klal, so number one, I will make decisions that will benefit not just the people who look like me, but I will go ahead and establish in existence and even encourage legislation that will be good for all the Jews of Israel, even if that means that there's a level of compromise for me. Correct? If on the other hand, I am the byproduct of a philosophy that I am here for my spiritual existence, and if you ask me, the Haredi Jew, me in Israel here, he will say, listen, there is a state, but that's not really my purpose here. I'm not here to build a state. I'm here to be part of that old tradition of the old Yeshuv, to be here in a spiritual state in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so there's a difference. Am I approaching my existence here as part of a nation, or am I approaching it as an individual who wants to experience something that's spiritual? On halachic issues, you can note it very much so. For example, Shemitah is coming. Shemitah is coming. If you're planning a trip to Israel over the next year and a half, at least be aware of it. It's Shemitah. One of the big problems has to do with vegetables. There's a problems in growing vegetables. How do you get them? So there are different options. So now, I, for example, want to import carrots from Holland. Right? Carrots from Holland to Israel. Or I want to go ahead and bring in some cucumbers from Egypt to Israel. And that's how I'm going to supply the marketplace with vegetables. So I ask two people what their opinion on the matter is. I turn to the Haredi Jew and I turn to the religious Zionist Jew. And they're both Torah scholars. What answer am I going to get? So the Haredi approach would be, this is wonderful. You could get individuals to have their vegetables with no halachic issues, period. That's wonderful. If you turn to the religious Zionist Jew, he will say that that's very problematic. True, you have taken care of the halachic issue, but there's no mass answer there. And if we're going to go ahead and bring in a mass import, it will not be good for the farmers. You have to find a compromise that is not just good for you as an individual, it is good for you as a nation. So there's a major philosophical difference here. You should be aware of the fact that I'm bringing out here two individuals that are on the edge of a wide spectrum, because the reality is that you have people within both groups that are a little bit here and a little bit there. But that's the basic philosophy to understand what is taking place there. And we could go on with many, many details. It's interesting to note that when you talk about Rav Kook, you will always hear him in the context of Eretz Yisrael, Zionism, but there's so much to learn from him as a rabbi, because he talks about being sensitive to the community, not to go ahead and establish laws or to go ahead and teach and preach things that are too high for the masses, because you are achieving nothing. You have to be mindful of the condition and the state of the congregation before you open your mouth. So these are rabbinic teachings, right? They are not rabbinic as for rabbis to know. And they don't on the surface relate to Zionism, but they're really the same thing, because both of them are thinking of the klal, It's important to remember this idea. So now, the covenant at Sinai is a covenant for the individual. Every individual is standing there, decides that for eternity, his descendants, her descendants will be linked to this higher being that we call God. It was not a national experience. It was not a covenant with us to turn into a am. True, all of us are Bnei Israel, but it's not an experience of it's not a national covenant. The national covenant takes place right here, as they are standing, preparing themselves to enter Eretz Yisrael. And in some ways, by the way, the region, the area where they are standing, turns into Eretz Yisrael. You know that where they are standing is actually modern-day Jordan. And if we would visit that region around 2,700 years ago, we know that there were Jews settled there. There were Jews settled there, the tribes of Reuven, Gad. It's very, very possible that during the Second Temple period, there was a strong Jewish presence there as well. According to many, there was. When you visit the old city now, and you walk into the Cardo, they have there a map, a mosaic map of Jerusalem. Seen it? A mosaic map of Jerusalem. And the reason that it's a 6th or 7th century map that was found, it's a replica of this mosaic that was found in Jordan, in a place called the Meidva. And the map is called the map of Meidva. It is placed in the Cardo because in the map itself, you see the stones of the mosaic indicate that there was indeed a highway crossing through the city, as the Roman did the Cardo. So therefore they placed the replica in the Cardo. This city of Meidva, which is in Jordan, is mentioned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah talks about the crisis in Meidva, that they wanted to build a mikvah, but the problem is that if you're in Jordan, and mikvah needs rainwater, you don't have rain. So what do? So they came up with this option of bringing in snow. How did it not melt? I don't know exactly, but it's mentioned there. So there's a Jewish presence, so where they are standing here is attached and eventually will become Eretz Yisrael. So it's appropriate that the covenant of a nation is taking place right there, and right then they are entering into the land, and in some ways they are already in the land. This is a covenant, a national covenant. You know, it's important to remember, imagine you ask a halachic authority 200 years ago that the Austrian army is trying to get me, or is forcing me, or legally speaking I have to join them. But there's a battle taking place, and statistically there's a 35% chance or even a 5% chance that I'm not coming home. Do I have the right to get out of it? I would ask the halachic authority. Correct? So what would the halachic authority tell me? Do your best. So many of us have last names. It's interesting that my father's grandfather, so it's my great-grandfather, right? So the last name was Kolodetsky. They changed it in Israel to Kolitz. Kolitz, well-known last name there. But that wasn't the real last name. Prior to First World War, the last name I think was Rabinowitz or something like that. And the young man, my great-grandfather, as a young man, he was extremely concerned that he's going to be drafted into the Russian army. But they found out that there were 3 brothers, Kolodetsky, that somehow there were passes and they didn't need them. And all you need to do is become a Kolodetsky and you're free. So he became a Kolodetsky. I would also change my name, if it frees me from serving in the Russian army being sent out to Japan in 1905, correct? So that's what they did. That's how the name was changed. I've been told that my great grandmother, who lived until 1974, my mother met her. So when people would ask her in Israel, right, in the 1960s and 70s, to share details about the fact that he illegally changed his name, she would say, shh, you don't speak about it. So this is after the Russian Empire fell, and this is after, she gets to Israel and there's a Jewish state, but you still didn't talk about these things. That the name, you wouldn't answer. Very, very interesting how people work. If on the other hand, I have the same question in the state of Israel, right? Go to the army, right? Suddenly, what would of course, the religious Zionist posting tell me? It's the greatest mitzvah, because we are a new nation. We're no longer just individuals. We're no longer just individuals standing there trying to pull through and figure out how to survive. And even if you made your way to Israel, you're still the individual. Now, when we have this new entity, When we have something that unites us, we are thinking differently. And therefore, it's suddenly the greatest mitzvah to defend your people. It's a new entity. The pact, the covenant of Sinai is a covenant for the individual. The covenant here is that you are going to turn le'am. You are a nation. And you are a nation, you think differently. You make decisions differently. And therefore, when you become a nation, in other words, for example, the individual who could study Torah day and night and achieve greatness, but then he could do something called sarket tzibur, the needs of the congregation. So what do we say? That it's the greatest mitzvah, it's sarket tzibur, because you are thinking of the congregation. You recognize something called Klal Yisrael. That is what this covenant is about. And it is always read before Rosh Hashanah, because that is the healthiest approach to Rosh Hashanah. You approach Rosh Hashanah as an individual, you're the individual. If you approach it and have an understanding that I am part of something significant, and there's a guarantee that Klal Yisrael will always be around, and I am linked and I value that I'm going to live my life for the sake of the Klal, and I'm going to do for the Klal, I'm going to take care of their physical, spiritual needs. If I go ahead and make my life and I link and I become part of this great thing called Klal Yisrael, I'm safe, because Klal Yisrael has a guarantee, individuals don't. And that's why we celebrate such a return. And that's, I think, what explains the philosophy more than anything else. And all those things that you do mention, they look outward, they look inward, how to deal with them. There's a whole list of things that are the byproduct of this general philosophy. But this is a parsha that says that we are indeed in Am. That's how, I think, a logical approach to understand why we need another covenant. We thank you. Bezrat Hashem, we do meet next week. We'll do Parashat Ha'azinu, which is a song. And hopefully we can continue our journey preparing for Rosh Hashanah. Thank you so much. Have a good day.